In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to use Lovable.dev, which is another text to web app platform similar to Bolt.new that lets you build MVPs and prototypes with relative ease. While Bolt is great, Lovable has some advantages that make it a lot easier to use for certain functions such as setting up authentication, hooking up a database, as well as even enabling payments through Stripe, which has been a bit painful using something like Bolt.new up to now. I'm going to start with a big picture overview of some of the key concepts you should understand when you're trying to differentiate between these two applications and when you can or should use each of them. And then I'll jump straight into Lovable to start building and showing these concepts step by step. Instead of just going through a bunch of slides, we'll actually do application right away so you can see how to connect a database, how to enable Stripe, and how to build certain types of web applications that you can now embed in other websites as well. I'm going to first go full teacher mode and pull out a whiteboard to walk you through some of these differences, what Lovable is, and explain what Superbase is, the core database that it uses to actually enable all its functionalities. All right, so teacher mode activated. I'm going to walk through the difference between Lovable, let's just capitalize that, as well as Bolt.new. So let's make a little separator here, and then we'll use Bolt.new. All right, so on the Lovable side, it's built on top of this database. We'll call it a hypercharged or a supercharged database. It's called Superbase. It's even in the name, Super Database. And then you have Bolt.new built on top of, I'm just going to call this web browser infrastructure. So I'm going to call it infra. I don't want to get into semantics and details because that's not the point of this video. This is super high level just to grasp the core key difference here that is responsible for all kinds of different functionality differences. So on the Lovable side, you can imagine you have this database, okay? And then we have some rows and columns. And then on top of this database, you also have functions. So we call this, let's say, function 1, and we have function 2. These functions are called edge functions, okay? So these edge functions are what allows you in Lovable to actually create a Stripe integration, to create a hook to a database to allow for authentication. So these are, let's say, mini helpers that help the database do more than just house data. It helps it actually be very nimble and execute different workflows from one core environment versus building a whole backend similar to what Bolt does, where you are hosting that somewhere and it's being executed while you're going through the app. It's a lot more lightweight in the capacity that you're using an actual database. On the Bolt side, you basically have, again, with the actual web browser, it's not built on top of a core database. Now they have added Superbase integration recently, so this is as of a few weeks ago, but it's not actually fundamentally designed on Superbase or a database like Superbase. So the way this creates functions is wildly different from the way this creates functions. Meaning, certain things are easier to do in Bolt, certain things are easier to use in Lovable. It really depends on the use case you're looking for. Now, in terms of the LLMs at play or how the app actually fundamentally works, they're very similar in the idea that they both have an LLM or LLMs actually orchestrating everything. So with Bolt, you primarily have Claude 3.5 Sonnet as the LLM of choice, whereas based on the documentation of Lovable, you have OpenAI, you have Gina AI, you also have, I think also Claude or Anthropic. So I think there's a hodgepodge of ones being used in Lovable versus ones in Bolt.new. So this is one core one that's being responsible for the Bolt.new infrastructure, and then you have a medley for Lovable. And I realize I should have made this orange, but you get the point. Comparing some other features at a high level, so both of these functions have the ability to go back in time. That is my poor way of drawing that. Let me do that in blue, actually. So both of them allow you to roll back if things get hairy, which, all of these things are still experimental, meaning at some point you will hit errors. It's almost a guarantee if you want to build a prototype or an MVP of value. So that's one thing they share. One thing that Lovable has that Bolt doesn't have is it allows you to select a specific element. So I'm just going to push down the marker here. So in the actual box, instead of taking a screenshot of your actual application saying, hey, fix this thing, you can actually click on the very bottom of your screen, which you'll see an actual element detector where you can click on the screen and say, this part of the actual web page, I want you to change it. Whereas Bolt has a function that lets you automate basically the writing of a prompt. So it helps with the prompt engineering side a lot more, which most of the time is super helpful, and that's a feature that's yet to be in Lovable itself. Both of them also connect to GitHub. With Lovable, it's kind of a one-click button, whereas with Bolt, you just have to do a little work to get there, but it's completely doable. They both actually use pictures as input if you wish, so I'm just going to put that in the middle here, so picture. And when it comes to using them for specific use cases, I find that for now, obviously these things change by the hour and the day, that Bolt.new is better for general UI plus UX. So in layman's term, it's nicer on design. So it has a better understanding of user interface and user experience, whereas Lovable has an advantage that you can render certain elements in a page that are trickier to do in Bolt. And if that will make no sense, but imagine you had some form of waitlist you were setting up. And on that waitlist, you not only wanted to easily connect some form of database, right, to apply early or to apply, right? So this would be Supabase. So I'm just going to put Supa. But maybe you want to throw in a Loom video or a VSL. So you want to be able to embed something on the actual web page. So imagine you want to have a video here, right? So if you try this, and I'll show you an actual example of this as one of our first use cases, this will work pretty well on the first try. On Bolt, it won't. And it does get back to how both are designed. It's not to say this is impossible, but it's infinitely easier on Lovable, at least the way it's designed. All right, so that's enough yapping. I'm going to ditch teacher mode now, and we'll jump straight into Lovable, where we'll experiment with a few things so you can gauge these differences in action versus me just speaking about them. All right, so before we even write our first prompt to create a very basic application in Lovable, I'm going to walk through how to actually set up Superbase, which I've been speaking about nonstop the whole time. So this is the actual website. Again, there's nothing crazy about the actual app itself. It is a database. One advantage it has over a lot of databases is it allows you to store vectors. And if you don't know why that matters, if you say want to store certain values, maybe an input from a user in a way that an LLM can scan and use as input, vectorizing is essential. So one key advantage with Superbase is you could create an edge function. If you remember, that's a helper function that would allow you to take certain columns and create vectors out of them, which are just texts and numbers that allow LLMs to process it and understand them. So if there is some form of follow through in the application you want to create, that gives you a certain advantage. So if you go here to product and you see here vector toolkit, you'll see that it basically lets you have a mini vector database on top of your normal database, which is why it's really useful, and it keeps you very nimble in terms of the types of applications you can actually create. So when you go in and you log in, you'll see some blank screen, and then you'll be able to create your first project. So for the purposes of this tutorial, let's create a project. And one prerequisite is that you'd set up some form of organization. On the free plan, I believe you get 2 different projects for free, and beyond that, you have to pay a certain amount per month. So let's create a new project, and we'll call it Lovable Demo. And for this, I'll use small, or let's use micro. So there is a payment here per month to be used, so be mindful of that. And then you set up a database password. So I'm just going to set up a pretty simple one here. And then you choose the region where your database should be hosted. So I'm going to choose Canada since I am in Canada. I'll create a new project. And this will take around 4 to 5 minutes. So I'll just wait for this to render and load. And you'll see here, it'll say setting up project. And once it's done, you should see 2 buttons on the right-hand side, both that are green that tell you green means go. You're good to actually use this database. All right, and it took around 6 to 7 minutes to actually finish, but now you can see project status and security issues are all resolved. So I'll give you a very quick tour of Superbase on what the features that you should care about are. So if you go to table editor here, this is where Lovable is going to actually create and write the databases depending on the application you're looking to make. So you're going to see this populated once Lovable actually knows what you're trying to build. When you go to edge functions here, this is where a lot of the functions that you'll need, let's say if you want to integrate Stripe or you want to do different functions that are outside the scope of normal backend, this is where it would be hosted. And if you go to project settings and look at edge functions here, this is where certain secrets are going to be stored. So when you set up your database for the first time, which you don't have to do, Lovable will just know, hey, we need to create some form of database because you want to store XYZ information about the user or their preferences or whatever. It's going to create some API keys for Superbase here, because it's going to be integrated with your infrastructure. And then you can click on add new secret to enable things like OpenAI or other LLMs to have their secrets actually embedded in the app itself. Beyond that, if you are logging in and setting up an account for the first time, you're going to want to go to Authentication and Providers and pick which providers you want to set up out of the box. For me personally, because I like to spin things up pretty quickly, I just choose email, and I remove this confirm email and secure email change to make things a lot easier. Otherwise, when you create authentication in the app, it'll have to confirm the email, and what happens is the confirmation goes nowhere because you have to set up what's called a redirect URL where it comes to here, this URL configuration. So if you're just experimenting with this to see what's possible, I would just remove those features for now, just to remove any headaches or friction from actually getting going. So with that, we can now use this database and we'll create our first mini demo, just hooking up to Supabase to see how that works. So we'll go into Lovable here, and in here, I will first click public to private. If you start with a free account, it will be public by default, meaning if you go to featured or latest, you will be able to access other people's projects there and look at their chat history. If you did want to make sure that all your projects are private, then you would want to upgrade to their $20 a month plan that allows you to do that. And one thing to do is if you want to stick to the free, just to try this out, be very careful not to put API keys or anything publicly available that could hurt you or your wallet, just because you can theoretically go into any of these featured apps, right? And go through their history and scroll up and see pretty much everything that happened in that conversation, which is awesome if you want to be able to see some of the building blocks and examples of prompts that are more effective than others to build actual applications, but not so much if you're putting publicly available information such as API keys or anything that can hurt your wallet. That would be ideal. So be very wary of how you enter certain API keys if you use public. Now, if we go back up here, we will say something very basic. So let's create an app that allows me to enter my top 5 business goals, create a design that is futuristic, modern, and has moving gradients in the background that are minimalistic. Now I'm keeping this very basic just to be able to show the functionality. So I'm just going to click here on private. We're going to send this and we'll wait for it to do its first actions. And this took around 2 minutes, but now you have a very basic user interface that lets you enter goals. So I want to make more profit. You can see the little gradient behind the scenes. Let's do another one. I want to hire many all-stars. Let's add that. And I don't think save goals actually does anything, because if we refresh the page, because there's no database to store this information, there's no what's called persistence. So if I refresh this, everything will go away because it's not tied to a user account. So this is a good opportunity to show you how their native Supabase actually works. So if you click on Superbase here and you go down, for the first time, you'll just need to authenticate into Superbase. And then after, you'll be able to connect to whichever database you wish. We're going to use our actual project we put together here, which is Lovable Demo. I'll click on connect. And then it pretty much enters an actual request that says, please connect my Supabase project, Lovable Demo. So one thing you'll notice about Lovable is even when you get errors, it writes a prompt that you can see to actually send it to the app to try to resolve the issue. So you'll see here it says, I'm now connecting to your Supabase project, yada, yada, yada. It says it's properly authenticated. It stores real data. And there we go. It tells you what kind of edge functions you can use and what you can do with that. So email notifications, payments, etc. So now if we go into our Lovable backend, we still don't have a database because we haven't told it what to store. So in this case, I'm going to say, can we create a authentication with email and password that will allow us to log in and save our goals by account. So again, we're keeping things very basic here. So as this is actually generating, the first time I won't actually cut. I'm just going to show you, even if you're not SQL savvy, and SQL stands for Standard Querying Language, which is a database language to actually create tables, it is doing all the work on the front end here to create a table called business goals. It came up with which fields it should store. So in this case, it came up with ID, which is some form of random ID that's assigned as a primary key. That's basically the ability to create a very unique, novel ID for a user that is different from user ID, which once in a while can be null, meaning it's non-existent if the user hasn't actually authenticated yet. And goal text is what you'd actually save here once you add a goal, and then created at would basically create a timestamp, which is basically what time and what day was this goal created. So one thing you'll notice is this thing called create policy, and there's a lot loaded here that you shouldn't care about unless it becomes a problem later on. The only time it becomes a problem is, let's say you have different user accounts, and let's say it's a matchmaking app of whatever use case. You need to be able to see and remove security at an individual account level, to be able to see all the values from all the accounts in order to do the matchmaking. In layman's terms, if user A has 4 goals and user B has 3 goals, because of the security, the way it's set up by default, user A can't see user B's goals. But let's say we wanted to matchmake these business owners by their very similar goals. We'd have to remove this layer of security to enable that. Again, you can remove that for now until it becomes a problem. So one thing that Lovable does is it tends to ask for permission a lot. So in this case, it tells you what the plan is. It says, after you approve the SQL commands, again, SQL is the language that you create, write to databases, it will do the following. So it'll create a UI, a user interface with email and password authentication. It will set up Supabase to create the actual table, and then it will do some error handling, meaning it'll set up some notifications to know if the user hasn't signed up with a proper email or they haven't authenticated themselves. It will have different routes to handle those scenarios. So if we click on apply changes, most of the time for something simple like this, it'll say the migration has been applied successfully. Sometimes you'll run into a scenario where it says there's an error, and it will get this little notification on screen that'll say fix. So most of the time, I'll click fix 2 to 3 times, and then I'll intervene myself if things are starting to get a bit hairy. All right, so now it has the UI with the email and password, and you can notice the font choice here is absolutely horrific. So I'm going to use this feature I alluded to before called select. I'm going to go into this box here until it hovers. So you can see this is a section, this is just the text, and as you go down, it'll tell you whether or not you're selecting something that is editable. So I'm going to click on this. So now it knows I'm referring to this part of the screen. I'm going to say the font is awful. Please make it something that goes with the background. And ideally, throw some design on the page with emojis. So let's see if that applies properly. So now you'll see it's edited the core font here. And one thing I couldn't select was this lime green font. So let me screenshot this and use this as input and say, change lime green to bold white font. I can't see anything. All right, so we got our first error here. It did change momentarily the font, but then it said build unsuccessful. So we have some error here. I'm gonna act like I don't know what it is. I'm gonna click on try to fix it. And again, sometimes this can be a loop that lasts 2-3 times. Sometimes you have to step in. One thing you can do is click on show error and see what the error is. This might mean absolutely nothing to you. But worst case, you put this into something like Perplexity and GPT, and maybe you can nudge along what it should do to resolve it. But typically for something like this, it's pretty straightforward that it should be solvable pretty quickly. So I ended up getting a few errors here. You'll see here, build unsuccessful, build unsuccessful. So it, for some reason, couldn't realize that I'm talking about this specific email address. So it remained green. So I'll show you a little hack, and I'm happy this error came up. So what I'll do is I'll click on open preview in a new tab. And even if you're not technically savvy, you'll see exactly what I'm doing here. So if you go on, and this is on Google Chrome, you have the equivalent of this in Firefox, Safari, etc. If you go to more tools and you go to developer tools, you can click on this icon. And by the way, this works on any website. So you can actually look at the element of any website if you want to emulate it as well. So you can see here as I'm going down, I can see the name of certain elements. So when I click on this, it shows me some names. So all I did is I copied this name. I then clicked on this arrow, went back, found this, copy pasted it. If you see here, all I did is I need to change this color to bold white. I just copy pasted what the element name is from here. as well as the second one. And then I just said, make it white. And as soon as I did that, you'll see here, it worked immediately. So that part was alleviated there. So now if we close this and we set up an account for the first time, and we'll do this, and let's make some password and sign up. So in this case, I just want to double check that we disabled authentication. So if we go on authentication and then providers, I think email went back to confirm email. So let's take that off here, and we can log in. Even if we didn't confirm the email, it will be able to log in given how it's structured. So I'll just click on sign in. Let me try this. Okay, so let's see. Let's do this. Let's paste the error. What's going on here? So I ended up getting a few more issues here that popped up, and I tried to click fix, and what happened was, because originally our Supabase, for some reason it reset. So if you go to the section I said authentication and then providers, you'll see if you go back to email, these are all clicked on. So it did need you to confirm your email, and because the email was not confirmed, it was having issues. So if I disable these now and I refresh just to make sure this took effect, let me just do this. One thing that I forgot to do is after actually toggling these off, you have to go and actually click save. So that didn't help my case. And just so I can start from scratch, I went to here, users, and then the two users I made, which is my prompt advisor's email, as well as the temp email I put together, I deleted them from the database. So theoretically, if I go in here now and I do markup prompt advisors and I create a password and I sign up, right? So I should be able to log in immediately because there's no confirming email. And now if I add a goal and I say I want to make millions as a goal and I add that, theoretically that should update our database in real time if it's synced up in the proper way. So how you can check that is if you go back to table editor, you'll see now Lovable's created through Superbase a table called business goals. And if I refresh this, you'll see that there's nothing here. So what I'll do is I'm going to ask it. So I was able to log in, but it doesn't seem like my goals are being stored at the account level. So you'll see here in the message it came up with, it said, looking at the RLS policies, so just think of that as security policies, I noticed that while we have yada, 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 basically there's no permission to write and read from there. So it basically wrote this SQL code, this database code, and I'm going to click on apply. Most of the time it'll say successfully, so there we go. So theoretically, if I now have this view re-render and I add a goal, it should add it to the actual database. Let's sign back in, and then I'm going to enter password, and we have nothing logged in now, right? So let's do, I want to make millions. Whoops, let's do add goal and click on save goals. Okay, goal saved. So we have an error here. So I want to see if the error is associated to saving at all. So it did save it. So the error we got was for something unrelated. So I'm going to click on show logs here. I feel like it's just not communicating in the correct way, but it did the right thing. So I'm just going to click on try to fix it. I won't hold you hostage until this resolves, and I'll show you what it looks like after. So it looks like we're in the clear now. So if I say another one, I want to hire unicorns, and I do add goal, I click on save goals, and I go back here. I don't even have to refresh. You can see it's actually synced towards here. So this is working now. And if we log out, our test can be, let's sign up with a temporary email. So I'm going to go to temp-mail.org. I'm going to create a new account. Okay. I'm going to create another password. I'm going to sign up. And then let's just add a goal, test goal, and I click add. This should save under a different user ID, a different created at, and it should store separately. So if I refresh here, we should have, one thing I forgot is to actually save the goal. So that should be something I changed in the actual interface. So for now, let's click on this. And you can see here we got test goal for a different user ID and a different unique ID for the actual goal itself. So if we go back here, let's now step this up just a tad and say, okay, now I want to be able to automatically save the goal anytime I enter it without having to basically click save goals in order to write to Supabase. This will make the, oops, spelling mistakes here, will make the user experience more seamless. So it says there's an autosave functionality now, which looks weird. It looks like it's infinitely saving things to the database. So I'm just curious what chaos is happening. Okay, so I'm just gonna take a screenshot here, and then I'm gonna paste it here. I'm gonna say we don't need this to autosave every moment like it is now, just when we actually enter the core goal. Otherwise, there's useless functionality, auto-saving, nothing. Right, so now it finished. It didn't take more than just one little reminder, and now it said something very important here. So it said, the business goals whatever file is getting very long. So one thing Lovable's interesting at doing is it looks at all the AI code that's been generated, and once in a while it'll tell you, hey, I think you should summarize this down because it's getting a bit too meaty. There might be too much fat in your code. So you can actually say, sure, refactor the code without disturbing any functionality. And then one thing to check here is when we did add goal now, if we do test goal 3 and we click on add goal, right, this will automatically save. So if I refresh here, this should say test goal 23, like you saw here. So we're good on that front. So I'm just gonna send this here to do that code refactoring, which again is just summarizing and leaning down your code to be as nimble as possible. All right, so now that it's done refactoring the code, we can say, let's now rework the underlying design to look more like Spotify design, but instead of green and black, it's a combination of white and the current violet we have. So I'm just more so showing you how you can alter design by giving it a reference point. So Spotify is very well known in terms of the actual design principles. So if you send that, we should be able to change it. So with a few different iterations, at first it gave me a poor attempt here where it wasn't the nicest, it was on a blank page. I basically said, try again, make it a bit more sleek and nicer, and then insisted on the white background versus the purple. So then I said, make the background purple and the core parts white. So vice versa of what you have. And then we got something like this. So we'll just settle with this for now. I can see the font's a bit more Spotify-esque. Let's focus on integrating Stripe, which was a bit of a Frankenstein show, using it in Bolt. If you watched that last video I did a few weeks ago. If not, then we're going to go into Stripe here. And what you can do in Lovable is say, I want to integrate Stripe so that anyone who wants to use this application has to pay $1. Let's do $1.99 a month. So now what it should do is it's smart enough, and I think they've trained their backend to be able to tell you exactly what elements you need to set that up. And what it's going to do, if you remember at the very beginning of the video, we now are going to take advantage of an edge function, so a helper function to go and create some form of integration into Stripe. So here it tells you step by step. You need a Stripe account, then you need a Stripe account with a recurring price of $1.99, then you need your Stripe API key. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into a test account of Stripe. So I've logged into Stripe and I've gone on test mode, which is good because we don't want to spend real money on this, and you can simulate actual payments. So if we go to payment links, I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to say business goals, and then I'm going to say it's recurring, and then it's $1.99 per month. Okay, so we'll do add product. And then we need a few things. It told you need a price ID, so I'll show you where to get that. When you create your product, you can go and then click on the product itself, and then you can go click on this number, and then if you go down, you'll see here a new price was created. If I click on this, you'll see here the price ID. If I click on this one, you'll see this ID at the top right. This ID is what we need. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to go into Lovable, and I'm going to say, here is the price ID. Okay, and then what else do we need? We have the Stripe account, we have this. The API key, I think it's gonna offer to embed it itself. So I'm gonna say, ask me for my Stripe API key so I can give it to you. So this is an actual feature within Lovable that it actually prompts you for API keys instead of you just entering it in the chat. Now I realize I spelled this wrong. Give it to you. Okay, so let me just send this. So it should now log this price ID as our product's price ID. It'll now come back with an actual request for the Stripe API key. And while I won't show the actual ID, where you have to go to retrieve it is you want to click on developers here. And on here, you want to click on API keys. And then you'll see a section that says secret key. You want to copy paste that and then input that into Lovable. So in this case, I'm going to enter my Stripe key into this handy dandy button it gave us. I'll click on submit. All right, so now we get a subscribe to gold tracker from the get-go, which looks very much like a normal software as a service application. If you click on subscribe now, we get an error. So it's something with the actual edge function. So I'm gonna let it figure that out on its own. So I'm gonna click on try to fix. So now we'll get this page again. And if you click on subscribe now within this actual view, it will just load forever. So what you wanna do is you wanna click on this, which is open preview in a new tab. You want to go here and then you'll get that view rendered again. And then once you actually log in, so let's do this. Let's log in, right? So now I have to pay. When you click on subscribe now, it says fail to start checkout process. So I'm just going to tell it. So I opened it and let me screenshot it to make it easier. And then paste this. So this should lead to the Stripe page that then I can pay, and then it sends some form of request back to the database saying, hey, Marcus paid. So if I say, so I opened it and got this error when I clicked subscribe now. I think it has something to do with the edge function. After 2 more tries, I'm still getting the same error. And one thing that I'm realizing is because I can't actually render this within the view itself, this little mini view, it doesn't really see the error. So again, if we go back to our old trick here, if we open this in a new tab, and if we go to the 3 dots here and go to more tools, developer tools, and then we basically try this again, let's click on subscribe now, you'll get this failure. You now at least have some traceability of the failure. So what I'll do is I will just take this and I'll screenshot it and I'll say, here are the errors, right? It has the same error. Here is the main error. And one thing here it's invited me to do now after running this again and showing it that error is it says create checkout logs. So if I go to create checkout logs, this is our edge function for create checkout, and you can see an error every single time. So this is the full error message. And if I copy this, it says error combining currencies. Interesting. So if I go to this, this is the core error. Should only be $199 USD per month. Shouldn't be an issue with the currencies. So getting the error again, this is what I'm going to do. And then this is the whole point of this tutorial. I'll show you what do you do when things go wrong. So I'm going to go to history here. And then I'm going to go to right after we did the purple to white authentication thing. Sorry, the purple to white redesign of the app. So let's go to that. I'm going to click restore. And now we've reverted to before chaos ensued. And I'm just going to go in here. I'm just going to delete some of these older subscriptions. So let me deactivate this because I think maybe my test account is malfunctioning with all of these different actual payment links. So let me just deactivate all of them, and then we'll create one from scratch. And just for simplicity, we'll make it Canadian dollars because I don't know if it really wants me to be Canadian. So we'll create a new one. We'll just call it add a new product. Goals, I'll just make it recurring, $199 Canadian a month, and I'll click add product. And then I will just create this link and I'll do the same thing. I will just go to goals. I'll go to the actual price. I'll go to price ID. I'll click on this. I'll take that link and I'll go back and I'll close this and I'll say, let's make it so that anyone who wants to use the app has to pay in order to use it. Ask me for my Stripe API key, and here is the price ID. Okay, we'll paste that. So we'll redo that part, and I'll go into my developers thing again and get an API key. Here we'll go to Stripe secret key, we'll add it, and we'll see if this makes things a little bit easier. So now when we take our second attempt here, I'm gonna open this in a new tab. We're gonna get the goal tracker. Now when you log in, you're gonna see subscribe now, which should take you to an actual account here, and you should be able to subscribe. So I'm gonna use the fake Stripe credit card test. So then I will put this 424242, and let's just go into here to make sure we have the right CSV. So let's do copy, and then let's paste here. Let's make up some random dates, some random numbers, and then I'll just put test, and then some postal code, and we should be able to click subscribe here, and then it'll quote unquote go through because it's a test function. And once that test function actually functions, we should be able to log in and actually use the app, which you can see here. So that's this part, and I did want to show you one more use case before we sum it up. So while everyone goes over how to build end-to-end applications using things like Lovable or Bolt or Windsurf, what people don't talk about is that you can build components with these services that lets you embed certain elements in your existing web pages. So let's say you're a small business owner and you want to be able to create some form of calculator to help with lead magnets or lead engagement and let people calculate the value of whatever it is that's relevant for your business. You can actually create this mini embedded app in Lovable and then be able to use it as an element in your existing application. So we're going to create a very basic calculator, and I'll show you how we can quickly embed that, and it'll give you some inspiration for what else you can use these text to web app applications for. So let's say you have a cleaning business and you want to be able to generate a rough estimate for how much cleaning per week would cost for someone's house, given the number of bedrooms, and the number of amenities, etc. And they can do it self-serve. So let's go here and let's say I want to create a very engaging calculator for a cleaning business. It should take the number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, square footage of the home, and be fairly simple for anyone to use. And then when someone clicks submit, it will then send all that information via lead form. And realistically, the next step here would be to create it via Superbase like we just did and log that in, but I won't prioritize that since we know how to do that. I'll just worry about the form itself. I'll just say don't worry about making the calculator submission usable or functional. Create the shell where you can enter things and select from drop-downs, etc. So we'll just click on private here, and then we'll click send. And then this is going to now send that request and ideally create that shell to show us exactly what that would look like. All right, and here's the first version of the draft of the calculator. On the left-hand side, you have, like we said, the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, type of service you're looking for to calculate the quote. If you want a custom quote or something more detailed, then you can put your name, email, and number. Again, I don't care to make this functional because I want to show you how to create what's called an iframe so you can actually embed it on an existing website. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to publish this. I'm going to click on private here. I'll click on deploy, and this will generate some link. I don't care to make it a custom domain yet. What you can do is you can go to a custom domain, go to Netlify, buy an actual domain and attach it, but we don't necessarily need to do that. If we click on this now, this is the new URL that we have. So this is important because this will be needed in our iframe that we need to embed in a website. So now we can actually go and ask, can you create an iframe of this calculator I can embed on my website? And what this should do is create some very specific code that you can copy paste into a portion of the web page to actually do the integration. And here we get the code. It says iframe at the beginning and end, so I know it's the right type of information. In src, it has some placeholder for website. That placeholder is this, so we're gonna need to put that. So I'm gonna just make my life easier and say, this is my deployed URL. Can you tailor the iframe? Just to be extra lazy here. So it should now make another version of this that just has that embedded URL we just created, inputted in that iframe object. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna copy paste this, and I see it added one component here that immediately is jumping out to me. So in case you see it on your end, make sure you remove it. You wanna remove this /embed because it's pretty much meaningless. We just need the actual full URL of the app. So if you put this in here, which is html-online.com, initially it shouldn't work until we remove this embed component. And then once you do that, it should be able to actually render. And you can see here on the left-hand side, you can see the actual screen or iframe that we created with that core calculator where you can actually click and interact with it. So let's say we actually made a web page from scratch. So let's go to ChatGPT. I'm gonna use my pro here. I'm gonna say, create a beautiful HTML, CSS for a web page for a cleaning business. You don't need to do this on your end. This is purely just to show you how this would work, assuming you had the website. So it finished actually creating the website. And if we copy paste this into the HTML online, you can see on the left-hand side here, you have some formulaic cleaning page, okay? So I can go back with some quick feedback to ChatGPT. I'll be like, hey, I don't like this. That's all good. Some picture here is not rendering. We don't need that. I'll say, please make the landing more minimalistic and remove the non-existing image here. And I'll say, please provide me with downloadable files to see this locally. All right, so now I created an HTML file that we can copy paste, as well as a CSS file. And if you don't know what a CSS file is, it's pretty much responsible for all the styling of a particular web page. So think of icons, colors, fonts, etc. So we can copy paste both of these into two separate files. So that's what I did. I created a new folder called web page, and then I called one index.html, and the other one, like it said, styles.css. It's important you name them these specific names because they reference each other. So if you name this styles2 without updating certain components of the HTML to refer to styles2, then they'll not be able to talk to each other, and then you'll have just a one page full of links and hyperlinks that looks pretty ugly. So what I did next is, now that I have them both in one folder, I use this app called Brackets. It's free to use. It basically lets you render things like HTML or CSS on your local desktop. So if I click on this bad boy, you'll see the actual web page as we saw it before. Now it looks a little bit more minimalistic. And what we want to do now is go back. And the whole point of this is to take this, and then I want to ask it, where do I put this iframe to embed it in the middle center of my web page? And then we'll put this here, and I'll just remove the embed like we did before. And then it should give me some updated HTML, not CSS necessarily, to be able to make sure that embed actually appears on that web page. All right, so initially, ChatGPT gave us small snippets of code where it said, hey, take this and put this wherever you want. Let's say we don't want to deal with that headache. I just asked it to output the entire HTML and CSS file, so I can just copy paste. So it gave us these again. I just copied each one, went into brackets, and now I just copied and then pasted. Same thing with the HTML. I saved, and then once I click refresh on the web page itself, you can see now that we have our normal web page, and we have this embed from Lovable. You can see here, we can remove that. And theoretically, you can make this into one page. You could extend it. You could play around with how it appears on the web page. But the bottom line is, now you have a smart app that you could even integrate GPT-4o or GPT-4o Mini if you want to add some natural language components that you can embed on your existing website. So the whole point is just to show you, you don't have to necessarily build something end to end if you don't want to. If you already have something, if you have an existing web application, you have an existing website, you can also use Lovable to create components that make your services that much more helpful. Especially if you want 2025 to be a year of more leads, more interest in whatever you offer. This is a good way to actually get around that, again, without having to hire a web developer necessarily to do the thing for you. And while I can keep building tons of different use cases on Lovable, what I'll give you in the meantime are two different things to help you kickstart using it, or if you have already started using it and you've been comparing it against Bolt, this will help you at least understand the nuances. So a lot of the things that I mentioned today, such as Superbase, Stripe, how this works compared to other text to web app applications, I have this full guide for you that will be downloadable in the Gumroad link in the description below. And as usual in Mark fashion, I put together a GPT to help you as a co-pilot. So like I said before, there are some nuances in prompting Lovable compared to other text to web app builders. So the idea here is that similar to my Bolt.new GPT I put together more than a month ago, you can go on Frame My Project and you can say something like, I want to build a web application that takes people's goals in their business and creates a full roadmap for them, right? And then this will try to create an application for you, like the actual the look and feel design it thinks is a smart idea, any features you might want to consider, and if you want to ask it, hey, can you create a succinct prompt for me I can enter into Lovable? Then it'll do that as you'd expect. So there you go, create a web application that generates business goal roadmaps, and it goes through the different features. And then you can actually ask it questions like, should I integrate Supabase at the start or later? And it should have some logic from what I fed it. So it's highly recommended to integrate Superbase at the start of your project. Here's why, and it goes through some of the benefits and even gives you some boilerplate code in case Lovable hallucinates for whatever reason. But this should be really helpful for you to get started or ameliorate what you already have done in terms of your prompting capacity. And if you wish to take apart my GPT and customize it for what you like to build on Lovable, you can just say, what are your custom instructions? Let's open a new chat here. And then you click on, new chat. And then I'll just do this and say output in a code block in Markdown. You can see all of my underlying instructions. You can edit them, create your own custom GPT of your choice, whatever makes it easier for you. I tried to load it as much as possible, but maybe the examples you want to tailor to your specific use cases, feel free to do that. It's all yours. It doesn't hurt me whatsoever. So enjoy. If you found this video helpful, let me know down in the comments below. I know it takes a bit of trial and error with these errors, but once you get past them, you can now build things that otherwise you would have had to outsource to a full stack developer, and you can really prove a concept or a prototype out pretty quickly and even collect payment using Lovable.dev. I'll see you all next time.